guys, welcome back to another supplemental episode. Trying to do some catch up before the end of the year. So I have another set of 5 books. This is kind of themed. So a while ago I read 9 Black Robes by Joan Biskupic, and I said, hey, don't worry, I have some other Supreme Court books coming down the line. At the time there was only 1, now there's 3. And so those are going to be my theme books. I have 3 Supreme Court books and then I have 2 more random ones that I'm just kind of putting on the end of this video. Again, trying to catch up with all the nonfiction that I've read this year before this year ends. So first I want to talk about The Supermajority, How the Supreme Court Divided America by Michael Waldman. This is very similar to 9 Black Robes in the sense that it's kind of narrating the rise of the supermajority on the court that leans to the right. But the difference here is that while Joan Biskupic is a journalist and was therefore kind of relating the different stories that she has discussed in her newspaper writing, Michael Waldman is a legal scholar and has been a legal scholar for years and years and years, and that really shows. He has a deeper, I think more incisive edge and interest and just more knowledge about the ins and outs of the court and legal theory and legal history and how these things that are currently happening within the court are different. And so again, it's very similar to 9 Black Robes, but I think that if you are looking for one that offers that extra edge of legal analysis and deeper, dive into that, The Supermajority is where it's at over 9 Black Robes. The other thing that's really interesting about Michael Waldman is that he is actively working on court reform, not just the Supreme Court, but he is just a reformer of the American legal system in general, particularly the court and how it works in America. So he also can offer that kind of analysis and different things that are being pushed for in other parts of our legal system that could potentially apply to the Supreme Court. Of course, he's writing this before they adopted their own ethics code. That was part of it. But just some other stuff. So again, if you're looking for a kind of like overall rise of the supermajority book and you're choosing between 9 Black Robes and the Supermajority, I would go with the Supermajority with the caveat that the Supermajority is denser than 9 Black Robes because it has all of that extra information. So 9 Black Robes will give you a more concise journalistic view of the whole thing, whereas you'll get more of the legal theory, scholarship, and ideas for court reform that come with this one. One of the ones that I was really excited to read was The Shadow Docket, How the Supreme Court Uses Stealth Rulings to Amass Power and Undermine the Republic by Stephen Vladeck. This is something that obviously could be its own book and is here, and really needs to be. I think 9 Black Robes, the Supermajority, they mention it, but they don't go into it and don't focus on it. It's just kind of part of their narrative. And the same holds true for the book I will talk about after The Shadow Docket as well. But it's such a key thing to understand because of the different ways that it is being used now by the Supreme Court that are totally astronomically different than any way that has been used before in the Supreme Court's history. Even though Stephen Vladeck, again, is a scholar, his writing is very easy to understand. I don't have a law degree, so for me to be able to understand it, it must have been clear. But he is at the same time kind of going backwards into the history and not just talking about what it is and how it's being used now, but giving you that historical insight to where this provision came from in the law, why it was used before, and how the way that it's being used now is so different than the way that it's been used in the past. So just with that alone, you get a far more historical understanding of what the Shadow Docket is and the change in its usage, as opposed to books like 9 Black Robes and the Supermajority, which are like, yeah, they use this a lot more now, they didn't used to do this, it works like this, and then kind of moving on. This is the context, the understanding, the explanation of the legal theory that is just not found in any of those other books. Something that I appreciated about Vladeck's argument is that while 9 Black Robes and the Supermajority had like this very specific political bent, Vladeck tells you very early on that he does not agree with the court's rightward turn, but that kind of doesn't matter to his argument. His point is that the shadow docket is being used in a way that does not conform to the Supreme Court standards, and its continued use is eroding trust in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court needs to be trustworthy for a functioning republic. So he's very kind of narrowly focused on this issue and saying, like, you know, you make the rulings you want to make, but you have to stop making them this way because it just makes this situation worse. One easy example of this is how like precedent is established by the Supreme Court. Lower courts often usually use the Supreme Court's decision to create precedent, so they understand how to rule on things that the Supreme Court is ruled on. Well, when they do a shadow docket ruling and there is no explanation for the way in which they ruled, it completely just kind of like disintegrates that communication between the lower courts and the Supreme Court, and they don't know how to rule, why they should rule that way, and it just can create genuine confusion in our legal system that wouldn't need to be there if they had done a full briefing on that issue and explained why they ruled the way they ruled. This is definitely the densest book of the bunch because we are really doing that deep dive into a very specific part of the legal theory and the legal history, the makeup of the court, how it works, and how it's different from ways that laws have been adjudicated in the past. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I don't necessarily know that I would recommend it as an audiobook because of those denser sections. Again, easy to understand than like, you know, a legal textbook or something. But at the same time, there were definitely sections where on the audiobook, I was like, oh, I really wish that I was reading this right now so I could really sit with these words and what does it mean? And I think that was Latin, and what is that phrase? Because there's just so much law in these books, obviously. So I really, really was glad that that book kind of lived up to its hype for me, because I had seen it talked about in a bunch of different places and seen the shadow docket itself talked about, and I really wanted to understand it. And I think this was a really good explanation of it. So finally, I want to talk about the scheme, how the right wing used dark money to capture the Supreme Court by Sheldon Whitehouse. I was very lukewarm on this book when I first saw it come up, because Sheldon Whitehouse is a current sitting US Senator from Rhode Island, and no matter your political leaning, he happens to be a Democrat, but when current politicians write books, they tend not to go over really well for me. They just end up being like campaign documents more than anything of substance. However, I did decide to read this book because it was blurbed on the front by Jane Mayer, who wrote Dark Money, which I have read and is in a supplemental way at the beginning of this journey, I think, who wrote one of the, if not the preeminent book on dark money. It's titled Dark Money. And so when I saw that she was giving it a positive review, I thought, well, this could be really interesting because it would take the general dark money thing that she was talking about, and is also talked about by Kurt Anderson in a book called Evil Geniuses, which was also really good, and kind of narrowing it on how it affects specifically the Supreme Court. So I took a chance on it, and I am glad that I did, because while Whitehouse does bring up his own experience, it is in furtherance of his own credibility. And so he's not talking about how like, I have a plan to fix it. In some cases he thinks he does, but less that and more like, this is the research I've done, these are the speeches that I've given, this is the work that I've done, the bipartisan, laws I've tried to pass. He was very focused on like climate science and like getting that passed, and dark money in general, and how certain corporations get captured, or certain regulatory agencies get captured, which is like, for example, why they blame the SEC for the crash in 2008. The SEC had gotten too cozy with Wall Street. They had been captured and allowed the crash to happen, stuff like that. He's also very committed to working bipartisan, so he talks a lot about different campaign finance reform stuff he tried to do with John McCain before John McCain passed away. And it's just really interesting, and he's clearly done his work, and he's focused on providing facts. And he's also willing to be critical of the Democrats in ways in which, like, for example, you know, Democrats were kind of watching the train wreck happen and didn't do anything to stop it. And he mentions that on a number of occasions, whether it's about like climate denial and how Democrats didn't step up when they should have, you know, the campaign finance stuff where they kind of let that happen, the dark money stuff where, again, they kind of know about it. And he's like, you know, we're always playing defense because, you know, we don't want to go there. But at the same time, he's like, you know, we're not actively trying to stop a lot of this in the way that we should, or we could have when we have the opportunity. So it's also, I feel, very healthy when someone who is a sitting Democratic senator is like, yeah, this is a problem, but at the same time, it's not like the Democrats are the heroes and they're going to fix everything. Like, we had opportunities to kind of stop some of this and we didn't, and now we're left with these consequences. I do think with this one that because I read Dark Money and Evil Geniuses, I was better prepared for this book. I'm not sure that, for example, like, there's a lot of legal stuff between, you know, 501c3s and the different ways that some of these like nonprofits are set up that channel dark money around. And he briefly touches on some of these things, but it's much more explored in Dark Money and then Evil Geniuses, which is kind of like Kurt Anderson's more updated version of Dark Money by Jane Mayer. And I don't know if you hadn't read those, if you would have understood White House's arguments to the point that I did, because I knew where he was coming from. So if you're interested in, you know, dark money, campaign finance, reform, all that kind of stuff, that's like a really good trilogy of books to read, starting with Dark Money, which is, you know, unfortunately kind of old now, and Evil Geniuses, which came out a few years ago by Kurt Anderson, and then this book, which focuses on the Supreme Court. I'm really glad that I did take the chance on this because, like I said, it was really interesting, it was easy to understand, and it benefited from White House being able to kind of explain certain things that are going on in the Senate during some of this stuff, because, you know, the way that the Senate handles Supreme Court nominations has really changed in the last few years, just based on Democratic and Republican changes. So he's able to also explain some of the contextual, like, conversations that were had around those changes and the Senate itself, which is not really into change, but has changed for very specific reasons around Supreme Court nominations and campaign finance in general. So glad I took a chance on it, and it's worth it if this is an area of interest for you. Okay, so we're moving away from Supreme Court stuff into a couple of unique reads, I think. And one of them is Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past, which is an edited collection edited by Kevin Cruz and Julian Zelitzer. I have to read my notes on this one, so I'm sorry that I'm looking down, because it's like really difficult to rate this book. And I kind of felt like I read this collection in reverse, because I have read full books from some of the people who contributed essays to this book. And so I've read that book already, and the essay itself is like a summary of the book, and I was like, yeah, I already know this because you explained it much better. Like Daniel Imawar and How to Hide an Empire contributes something to this. And some of the things that they were calling myths I thought were interesting. I was like, did you just use this as a title? And that's not really what you meant for this. You know, for example, the myth of American exceptionalism is something that they're calling a myth. And as is America is not an empire. Just some of the things didn't really seem to fit. I think the problem is that the introduction and the conclusion kind of center this around misinformation and the Trump years, and that's why they say this project is really necessary and interesting. And the problem for me is that most of these myths, if not all of these myths, have longer histories than the Trump years, and Trump himself is not, you know, just didn't pop out of nowhere, right? His policies, his production, his ability to be the president, it comes from a longer stream of history and a longer change of politics. And, you know, it just to kind of like say that he sprung from nowhere and that, you know, now these myths, we can talk about them as misinformation now because he was president. It rang a little hollow to me, and I think undermined the point of the collection, which is that we are known as Americans for telling ourselves myths about like the country or our history that we need to kind of unpack with more nuance. So again, I did enjoy it, but at the same time, I really felt like it felt a little weird, first of all, because I'd always rather read the book than the essay, and some of them I have. And then some of them I was like, why are we focalizing this chapter on the Trump presidency when there is such a bigger history that we could talk about here? Because it's trendy, I guess. I just want the history. That's what I want. Give it to me. And then finally, this is not a review. It is just a proud I accomplished this moment, which is that I finally did finish listening to the entire January 6th report from the Select Committee from the House. So I watched all of the hearings and I listened to the entire report, and that was a slog. And it's just like, I can't really even review it, right? Because it's not meant to be an engaging fiction story. It is a congressional report about this thing that happened and the facts they uncovered and the people that they talked to. And they did do, I think, a good job of trying to make it readable and not dense. And there's like a reason that it's on audio and that you can read it and that a regular person can definitely understand it. It's not filled with legalese or jargon or whatever, at least until you get to the referral section, but they're talking directly to like the Justice Department and Congress there, so that's fine. If you're wondering if you need to read it, here's the thing. At the beginning of the report, there's like a brief summary. It's not brief, but it is a summary of everything that is about to be discussed in more detail in the report. And some people have said you could read that and you don't have to read the rest of the report. If you don't want the nitty-gritty details, I highly agree with that. You can just read the executive summary, be done with it, and have learned what you needed to know. Even in the executive summary, there are things that come out that they did not discuss in the hearing. So if you're wondering if you need to do both of those things or you should do both of those things, you will learn more stuff from the executive summary. Obviously, you learn even more if you listen to the entire thing, but I don't know that it was necessarily worth it, especially because, I mean, I was listening to the audiobook and I just felt like, oh my gosh, I just don't know if I can do much more of this. So I'm proud that I finished it. I think it's a good thing to have read in its entirety so that when people try to talk to me about it, I have the citation. I have done my research. But yeah, if you're not me and you don't feel the need to do that, and if you really want to engage with it in a smaller way, executive summary, all the way. That is all that I have for today. Hopefully some of that was interesting to you, particularly if you were interested in reading some of the books on the Supreme Court and aren't sure where to start, because I mean, I've read 4 of them myself now. So maybe you want to read just one of those and I can help point you in the way. Hopefully that's helpful. Otherwise, I am going to go read a new book about literally anything else than law. No more law, no more Supreme Court, no more congressional reports. We're gonna read, I wonder if I can find another pirate book. I want pirates. I'm gonna go find some fun history and I'll see you back here for that next time. Bye.